want to thank you all for being here, those who are here in person and those of you who are watching right now or later. So very happy to have you here. So I will now switch over to the slides if I can. I'm screen sharing. That means I can't see me. Does it? They can see. They can? Okay. Now I want to go to these slides. Oh, no. So they can see the... So I'm going to talk about the topic power and status, the dragon in the Baram River. You'll understand better why the title is appropriate shortly. But why is this of interest to me? Why am I studying dragons? Well, partly I just like them. They appeal to me. This is a dragon in Hainault Forest near our house in London. There are a lot of carvings in this forest, and one of them, in fact, two of them are dragons. So that's one thing. I just like them. But also I think that dragons are a way of understanding people's relationship with the natural environment, how they think that the world, the cosmos works, because dragons seem to represent the flow of cosmic power through the universe, through water, through fire. There are many questions about whether dragons throughout the world are the same sort of thing, but there are dragonish creatures throughout the world. And I was prompted to start this research because in 2017, when the planning work was being done for the new Borneo Cultures Museum, I became a research fellow at the museum campus project. And the topic I was focusing on was animals and indigenous cosmologies, and I chose to focus on dragons. So dragons around the world, what we call dragons, because there are questions as to whether we can say they're all the same thing, but what we can call dragons have a deep history in myth. Around the world, you find that there are watery beings associated with power. Here we have the Mexican feathered serpent. There's the water dragon in Europe too. Now, the dragon in Europe is usually regarded as associated with fire, but there are scholars, in fact, who are arguing that originally it was more associated with water, and it is certainly associated with water as well as fire. There's the Chinese lung, which we'll come back to later, which is certainly associated with water. And then there's the Naga from India, which has been brought into Southeast Asia. But it's also something that's not only present in myth, but is significant in the modern world. So there are representations of dragons popping up quite regularly. So you have graffiti from different parts of the world. We've got Brazil, Tokyo, and Paris. You've got tattoos of dragons, very popular present day Southeast Asia. In fact, I went to a tattoo convention a couple of weeks ago here, and there were plenty of dragons being tattooed on people there. Now, the Borneo dragon seems to have a complicated origin. This is a crossroads, a cultural crossroads. So you have a coming together of what I would argue are three sources. There's the Chinese lung, the Indian naga, and also, interestingly, the Australasian rainbow serpent, because there do seem to be links to the rainbow, and I'll come back to that later. Now, I've been doing research among different groups, and so far I've published two papers, both of them in the Sarawak Museum Journal in 2019, one in a special issue with articles by fellows at the museum, and one in the normal issue. One article is about the Iban dragon. The Iban are a major tribe in Sarawak, and one is about the Highland dragon, which covers a group of people, including the Kelabit, whom I've been studying for many years, but also the Lunbawang and Lundaye. And I saw that there are differences in attitudes, and then there are parallels. And so there is a contrast between the Iban and the Highland Dragon in terms of the position that it holds. It's much more positive, one might say, although still a bit scary among the Iban. In the Highland area, it seems to be, there's more fear involved. So the source of material for this talk is mostly from a field trip that I made in July 2018 with Dora Dock of the Sarawak Museum to the Baram. And we spoke to Kayan, Kenya, Barawan and Penan when we went to the Baram. We had a good time, as you can see. It was a very pleasurable experience traveling with Dora. And I'd like to really thank her for going with me. She unfortunately can't be here today because she has to be at something to do with the museum, but I'm sure, Dora, you will be watching this at some point. But I also made a trip with my husband, Kaz, who's sitting over there, to the Mendalam River in Kalimantan. And I have some data that I'm going to present relating to the Kayan from that trip. It was a harvest festival, which is why everyone is dressed like that. So the python is very central to understanding the dragon in Sarawak. Almost all dragons among indigenous groups are said to derive from the python. And these are the terms that are used. So Langunan, Balungin, Barungan, and among the Kenya, there seem to be two terms. I was just talking to Matthew Ngau over there about this earlier. Alangonan and Balisungai. Balisungai means spirit of the river, literally. Alangonan seems to be dark human, dark shadow. We're going to need to talk about that further, Matthew. There's still a lot to find out. I feel I only really scratched the surface on this trip. But the python, it originates under mountains and it creates a landslide and goes into the river and turns into a dragon at this point. I'll come back to this. But pythons are rather special generally. There are these stories about pythons that have stones on their heads, which they offer to people. And Giles over there, Giles Langel, has told the stories that he heard in the Balaga area about people who didn't quite get the stone. They were offered it. They were too scared and they didn't take it. And if you do manage to get one of these stones, it will give you great power, kwasa in Malay. And this ring here, which belongs to John Walker, thank you, John, for letting me take a photograph, has one of these stones in it, which are known as Galiga Ular. So you find a lot of stuff on the internet about these if you look. So the python dragon is something powerful, lucky, protective among many people, but not universally. As I said, among the Highland people, it's not. And there are fears, higher levels of fear among some of the other groups. I'll come back to that among the Barawan. But for the Kayan and Kenya, it seems to be primarily regarded, as it is among the Iban, as powerful, lucky, and protective. So the python dragon is lucky. I'm not going to be able to read these properly. I'm not going to make this large. The python, is there any way that I can get access to all that text? So that I don't see all that. No? Oh well, I might have to, how am I going to do this? I cannot read all of the text at the top, unfortunately, from my quotes. No, that's the previous. Can the taskbar be moved down? Yes. Can this be moved? Ah, it can. There we go. So the python dragon is a symbol. Well, that one doesn't move. Can maybe just get rid of that. Is a symbol of splendidness, mulia, in Kayan. It can help people, like the Dewa di Langit. People used to pray to it. They used to have it at the prow of boats. The python dragon is quite suitable, according to Li Han, for churches. It's a protective symbol. Like the cross, it's a symbol of safety, resurrection, victory over death, and sin. So not everyone would agree with that, but that was what Li Han said to me. So, it's not going to, oh, we go. So on the field trip, we found a number of images of python dragons. Now, there are, of course, many in the museum. There are carvings, there are kettles, there are gongs, but which show more of the Chinese dragon, shall we say. Come back to the different kinds of images later. But the images that I found were mostly paintings. So here we have a range of images from Kayan communities. As you can see, they range from quite animal-like to very stylized. The stylized ones seem to express the sense that it's a sort of sentient flow, but not actually an animal, a spirit, more spirit-like. The ones that are more like the python, in fact, that are more like an animal, are closer to the Chinese dragon. We'll come back to that. And there are quite a number of paintings of python dragons on Catholic churches. And I found this very interesting. And I must say I liked it, because I think myself, I was brought up a Catholic, and I like the idea of respect for nature, of seeing that force of nature as something you can put on a church, as Li Han said. And this, in fact, it is a strand in Catholicism. So this is a quote from the book, The Church and Cultures by Uzbetak. He said, the universal church should allow local churches to incorporate non-Christian elements as part and parcel of the local Christian community's behavior. And this is called enculturation by the Catholic Church. So these murals are on a chapel in Miri, which unfortunately has recently been demolished, although apparently they're going to try and reuse the paintings. They may not find it easy to use the ones on the outside of the church, which these are. There are also beautiful paintings inside, but I won't show you all of these to tantalize you. If you're interested, I'll be putting up my contact details at the end, and please get in touch and I can send you any further pictures. And this is something, so this is a quote that I had. People seldom want to have the python dragon in the house because only higher grade people can use it, because otherwise it's dangerous, too powerful. In the church, it's okay because it's a powerful place, a place for people to pray. This is what I was told by an artist who was involved in painting some of the churches. In fact, trying to go to the next slide. So he was involved together. I hope I'm right in this. I believe that he and Dominic Epoy did these murals. These are new murals at the St. Paul's Church in Longsan. And as you can see, they are very beautiful. And there are paintings inside and outside. And there are even paintings below the Stations of the Cross, as you can see in the bottom picture on the left. Okay. And in the Mandalam, there was a church, unfortunately not there any longer. It got very old and they demolished it. But Pastor Ding Ngo's church in Padua in Mandalam had many dragons on it, inside and outside. And these are photographs from when it was still there. And you can see in the top one, the pastor has been sort of pasted in because it's his church. And I think the person who produced this photograph and had it up on their wall had put him in. And there's the inside of the church. And he was buried in a dragon coffin, Pastor Ding. Which is really fascinating because it's the salong, it's the traditional way of respecting someone of high status, to put them in a coffin high up like that. But this coffin is Christian, it's got a cross on it, but it's also got python dragons Okay, let's see if we can get to the next page. Now, the new church at Padua was under construction when we visited in 2018, and it too has dragons on it. These are simply sort of plastic panels at the moment because the church is not finished, but they have dragons on them. Okay, now I don't know whether I should move this up here. Let's try and get it out the way. These paintings are by Barawan artists from Long Dragan who were invited to Kuching in the 50s by Tom Harrison. And I'd like to thank Louise Macul, who's here, for giving me photographs of these paintings. There are many more. These are decorations from Tom Harrison's bungalow. But there are also separate paintings that were done for the museum, and there are quite a number, and Louise is going to be telling us something about the ceiling panels in a future talk, in fact. So a comment by the Pangulu in Long Dragan, where we visited, was the dragon must be ornamented to make it beautiful and balanced. So he didn't like the idea of the Chinese dragon in the sense that it's too simple. It needs to have lots of ornamentation, which is the more stylized version of the dragon, and raises interesting questions about whether it should be regarded as an animal. What relationship does it have with the python? Okay, we'll try to move down. Now, the python transforms into a dragon, as I said. And so what can we say about what happens? I'm now going to start reading some quotes to you from informants. I'm just going to read them out because I know that what happens is if you put lots of text up, people just start reading the text. So I'm going to read it to you. But the long and the short of the text quotes on this page are that the python is huge. The python dragon turns into a dragon if it's a python that's never been seen by a human, which is an interesting point. And it descends from under a mountain through a landslide. So I'm going to now see if we can get the, okay. So a python that has never been seen by a human will become a python dragon. There was a big python at the base of a tree at the top of the Baram River. There was also a little snake who went to the top of the tree to call for rain on behalf of the big python. The python then turned into a python dragon and went down to the river, creating a landslide into a pool it created. It stayed in the pool for 2 years and it was very big, and then it broke out of the pool and went into the big river. The python dragon comes from the mountain. When it becomes big enough, it calls for rain and makes a landslide and comes down. There is a python coiled inside a mountain downstream from here. It caused a landslide. The Chinese loggers are afraid of it. They asked a traditional practitioner to get it to move, but it won't move. There were 2 very big pythons under the mountain near here, husband and wife. They'd almost turned into python dragons. If you wanted to see them, you had to wait for the full moon. So the next full moon, a man from the longhouse climbed a tree. What does that say? At about 1 in the morning, a very big python came with ears, but not very long, not quite horns. It wasn't quite a python dragon. He shot it and rolled it into the river. Then suddenly part of the mountain collapsed. There was a big landslide. A man from the longhouse went to his farm nearby and he saw water flowing over a ledge in the river. That was the python dragon that remained. It had finished transforming and was in the river. I don't know if this was the male or the female. Now the python dragon is under the land, under mountains and in wet, swampy areas. There's a python dragon coiled inside that mountain and it cannot be asked to move. There's a swampy place near here where the road keeps sinking. That's because there's a dragon under that place. Some people have seen the head of the dragon. It doesn't approve of the road. There are 2 places near here where there's a dragon. One is a pool and the other is a swampy area. Now, the python dragon is very closely associated with water. It calls for rain and it creates high water. So it's able to make it rain. It calls for rain to take it down the river. When the python dragon wants to move, that's down the river, it will call for all the animals to call for the rain to come. It can be really noisy. It's a kind of farewell to the python dragon when it's leaving. If the river rises, our grandparents told us that it's because of the python dragon. There's a Kayan saying, when the water is high, Lungunan Pude, the python dragon is moving. When the water's high, people say the python dragons are coming down from the mountain. So Kayan encounters were, I'm going to just go through some quotes from the different groups talking about encounters that they've had with python dragons. So Kayan talk about encounters in the river. Often they see them as logs, and it's lucky to see them or even to touch them, although they are still quite scary. Seeing a python dragon is lucky. It appeared as a log, like a ledge in the river. The water flowed over it. It followed us for a while and then vanished. It was there, but we couldn't exactly see it. There were lots of fish under it, and we got a good catch. My mother saw one crossing the river. The head was at the other side of the river. There was a hole in the riverbank and a whistling sound kept coming out of it. Then I saw a dragon coming out of the hole in the bank and going into the river. My husband asked me afterwards why I hadn't taken a bath with it in the river to get luck. But I was scared. The whistling stopped after the dragon came out. And this is a nice story. When I was a priest in Balaga, there was a Kayan man who caught a piece of wood in a pool, which he said was a python dragon. He kept it in a special room for a long time, and people worshipped it. He gave it blood offerings from chickens and small pigs. Then he and also his daughter died. The daughter's husband didn't want the dragon. He said it was too expensive and too frightening. He'd become a Catholic, so he contacted me and asked me what he should do about the dragon. So this is a story told to me by a Catholic priest. I asked him if he wanted to follow the dragon or Jesus. He said he wanted to follow both. I said, you can't do that. I will burn your dragon. The husband said, no, you can't do that. At least let me say sorry to my dragon and let it go to its home in the Rajang River. I told him, no, that would mean you still believe in your dragon. I told him that maybe we can cut your dragon to pieces and you throw it away somewhere. He agreed to that, so long as it wasn't burnt. So they cut it into many pieces and asked someone to throw it into the forest. So this priest told me this when I was in the Mandalam, but it's a story about his experience in the Rejang. So Kunya encounters now in the river as logs, protective, and they mentioned also sometimes as a human. It looks like a log. It floats in the river, not at the bottom and not at the top. People see it when they dive into deep, clear water. There used to be one below our longhouse, but it was washed away. It used to appear and scare children to send them home when it wasn't safe to bathe in the river. This is from Long Mo. It can appear as a human. Now, Barawan are more inclined to see the dragon as dangerous, and they said that it's dangerous to meet it because it might eat you, your spirit. And this is the sort of thing I heard from the Highland people too, that if you saw the dragon, you would die, basically. In the Highlands, they would see the dragon in another form, as a buffalo or a deer, but not normally as a dragon. If you saw it as an actual dragon, it was very dangerous. And the Penan. So it's among the Penan that I came across a specific reference to the rainbow. I have actually, among the Bidayu, I'm not talking about the Bidayu but here, but among the Bidayu group, they also talk about the rainbow. And I think there are other references to the rainbow as associated with the dragon. But the only reference that I came across here in the Baram was this Penan statement. When there's a rainbow and sun and rain together, that means the python dragon is having a bath, and children are warned not to go out because they could become ill if they look at the rainbow. which is a reflection of the python dragon in the sky. And the Punan use the same word for python dragon and rainbow. So they conflate the two. So what does it look like? It's huge, horned, and striped. When pythons grow bigger and grow horns, they become python dragons. The dragon I saw had complex branching horns like tree branches and a face like a snake with very big eyes, and the shape of the head was just like a python. It was striped along its back with many colors and had horns the length of my thumb. I was 5 or 6 years old. I was having a pea on a log when I saw the dragon. It had horns and a string of white beads and a pendant hanging from the horns. We were in a boat, and suddenly we saw white bubbles and then quite long horns, the deer horns with blunt ends. The dragon followed us for a while and then vanished. And these dragon horns are very lucky. If you can get one, it gives you luck in life and potentially power. And sometimes it's offered to people, like the stones from the python. Sometimes the python dragon offers its horns. It has 3 horns, like a barking deer, curved. The python dragon's horns are very lucky. They give great success and health and wealth. This is Dora telling me both of these. People sometimes have dreams in which the python dragon offers its horns to them. I knew of a mother and son who tried to take a python dragon's horns. It was angry and drowned them. Now, a little story from the Barawan. The python dragon fights the sea dragon. Now, I'm quite fascinated by this distinction between sea dragon and land dragon, in fact. So the python dragon essentially could be seen as counterposing the sea dragon. And I've recently been told a story by a Malay who was also referring to a battle between the land dragon and the sea dragon. So anyone who's got any stories like this, please do get in touch. This story is very briefly, the python dragon came out from underground because it wanted to look at the stars. It went downriver and fought with the sea dragon. It won, and then it flew back up to the high mountain. And there's some indication this is a sort of cycle, that it goes down and then comes back, but it's a continuous cycle. Now we're going on to another kind of dragon, the Sengiyang dragon. This is only, I'm going to have to move this. So I call it the aristocrat's friend. And this painting is also by Al-Alsano, like the one that you saw earlier.
The service center.
Someone speaking. Let me see if I can move this right down there, maybe. What's happened? Is it okay? Okay. It's all working fine there. Okay. So this painting is by Al-Alsano, and I'm going to give you a few quotes. Oops. Okay. So the Sengiyang dragon is said to be like a spirit or shadow that moves so fast that you can't quite see it. It's mentioned in invocations by shamans. For example, Sengiyang Nyami, Napang, Tahit Baran Lavang. The Sengiyang likes to bask in the sun on clean sand or gravel by the banks of a river. So it's not quite so aquatic. It doesn't just spend its time in the water. It likes to be near water, but quite often it's not near water. It's more like perhaps a lizard or something. If you see it, you get great power. My great-grandfather speared a Sengiyang dragon and got its scale. He became invincible. The scale came down to my father. In the past, it could become friends with people, which was known as sibila. It would give them prosperity and success. If you had it as a friend, you could call it to help and guide you when you went traveling or hunting. Sengiyang dragons are invisible to most people. When people think of Sengiyang dragons, they think of maran, which is the Kayan word for what is often called aristocrats in English, high status people. There were carvings of Sinyang dragons in Maran apartments in longhouses in the past. So there's a close association between Sinyang dragons and aristocrats. The Kayan are a very hierarchical group. So groups in Borneo vary. For those of you that don't know too much about Borneo, they range from groups that are really quite egalitarian, although if you are successful in life, you will rise to become a leader. But they are basically egalitarian, to quite hierarchical groups, and the Kayan are hierarchical. So, and it's only among the Kayan that the Sinyang dragon is mentioned. So where does the Sinyang dragon come from? Well, the python dragon comes from a python. The Sinyang dragon is mostly said to come from a cobra, and sometimes a blue coral snake or red crate. I'm not sure which it is because they're very similar looking, but a poisonous snake. But some people said that the python dragon turns into a Sinyang eventually, presumably when it gets very powerful. Now, an example of a friendship between a Sinyang dragon and a leader, Pengulu Kabing, who lived not that long ago, so in the middle of the 20th century. The Sinyang became a sibila, or friend or protector, to Pengulu Kabing, as Aranimang Jok said to me. And Cecilia told me that the relationship between the python dragon and the Sinyang dragon is like that between the headman and his committee. So how did he become friends with the Sinyang dragon? Well, I was told the story by some of his descendants, his grandchildren, children as well, in fact, when we visited. And the story is that either in a dream or truly, he had a race with the Sinyang dragon. Now, the Sinyang dragon is able to extend itself endlessly. So it doesn't actually run when it races with you, it just expands very rapidly. And a man, of course, has to actually run. So he ran a race with the Sinyang dragon to see whether it could expand faster than he could run. And he lost the race the first time, but the second time he won. And after that, he was regarded as having great power, and he became Pengulu. And the Sinyang dragon became his friend, his sibila. So the dragon is a source of power and status. It's a source of sort of cosmic power and life force. It helps people to lead their lives successfully, but it's also associated with the kind of power that aristocrats and leaders have. And you see that with the Sinyang dragon. So some quotes on this. When people think of the python dragon, they think of power. The Sinyang is powerful, invisible, and aristocratic. In the past, the spirits of dragons could enter into people. Spirits that did this were spirit familiars. Powerful people had them. In the pool below the market at Putusibao, Brit Ping saw the Sinyang. If you see the Sinyang, you become Ningan, very powerful, able to do magical things. He dreamed 3 days and nights and then created the Takna Ida Baran, one of the Kayan epics. That enabled him to do that. Now, I want to say something about the Chinese dragon. So, as I said earlier, you have representations of the python dragon that are more like an animal, more like a python, and they are more similar to the Chinese dragon, the representations of the Chinese dragon, which looks quite like an animal. And then you get representations that are much more stylized. So what did the people in the Baram say about the Chinese dragon? Everybody out there can also see all of these, see this bar. So our python dragon is the same as the Chinese dragon. The Kayan come from Yunnan. That's one view. Go and ask the Chinese about the python dragon. They know all about it. They always make pictures of it. The python dragon is not the same as the Chinese dragon. The Chinese python dragon has a fish tail, and the Barawan python dragon does not. The Chinese dragon is not as beautiful as the Barawan python dragon. It has no ornamentation or decoration. The python dragon looks like the Hudok carving they made for the prow of a boat to compete in the Baram Regatta. The python dragon's head looks like the head of the Chinese dragon that you can see at the Tua Pek Kong temple, but it doesn't have legs. The python dragon has arms and legs like the Chinese dragon, but they're inside its body. Once some men from our village brought a python back and I saw legs coming out of it. They were like the legs of a chicken. The claws were as long as a forefinger. The legs were grey with white stripes. So there are different views. So here are some conclusions. Let me see if I can, okay. Kayan, Kunya, Barawan, and Panan in the Baram all tell stories about encounters with dragons. All are said to derive from snakes. All are from the python except the Kayan Singyang, which derives from a poisonous snake, usually said to be the cobra. Dragons are all very powerful and can help humans. Now, python dragons are said to originate in mountains, sometimes under mountains, and to move into the river when they become dragons. Sometimes they're present under the land in flatter areas, especially if they're wet. The Kayan and Kunya, like the Iban, seem to see the dragon as more protective and benevolent towards humans and as a source of power. The Barawan see the dragon as a source of power, but also, like the Kelabit and the Lundaya, as dangerous and possibly not benevolent. The Panan associate the dragon with the rainbow, which seems to be an echo of the Australasian rainbow serpent. The Kayan associate the Singyam dragon with Maran, aristocrats. And descriptions and representations of the dragon range from very stylized to something more like the Chinese dragon. So there's evidence of a good deal of cross and intercultural interaction and perceptions of the dragon, and this is really what interests me so much about the dragon, including, importantly, with the Chinese. So the Chinese have been coming to Southeast Asia for millennia. There's been constant interaction. So local beliefs about water and spirits seem to have encountered the Chinese belief in the Lung. And of course, the people of Southeast Asia did originally come from the same ethnic origins as the Chinese long, long ago. So they may be shared history, but there is a lot that is similar. And mostly local people will say that their dragons are essentially the same as the Chinese dragon, although you saw that some people said that it wasn't the same. I think they're talking more about the way it's represented and painted and carved, maybe, than the actual dragon. So has the Chinese image of the Lung dragon been superimposed on an existing concept that was less animal-like? Because the Chinese dragon is quite animal-like. I mean, people often say, you know, is it possible that they remember the dinosaurs? Which of course is not possible because the dinosaurs were much longer ago. However, there are sort of strange echoes of dinosaur-like creatures in the way that the dragon is portrayed, the Chinese dragon. Okay, let's see if I can get to the next page. So that is actually the end. I want to thank you all for listening. It's a great pleasure to share my research with you. And I would like to thank all of the people that I spoke to on the field trips. And I'd like to thank Dora for going with me on the field trips. I won't read out all the names, but they're here if you're interested in reading. And I'd like to thank my husband Kaz over there for coming with me on one of them and for accompanying me to Sarawak so I can study my dragons. And please do get in touch if you've got any dragon stories to share. This is my WhatsApp number and my email. So do copy them down and get in touch. I'd be very happy to hear from you. So I'm just going to give you a moment to write this down. And then I will hand over to Datin Dr. Val Mashman, who will tell you about forthcoming talks. So I hope you've all had enough time to copy that down, and I will pass down to the next slide and hand over to Val. Okay, thanks everybody. Same one.
You need to unmute yourself, Val.
Thanks, Pauline. Our next talk will be on Friday, March at 2:30, and that is about linguistic approaches to reconstructing human history and the historical exodus of the Punan from Sarawak. So this is a very interesting talk taken from the point of view of historical linguistics, which will tell us more about the history of the Punan. And our next talk is going to be also very interesting. It's called Political by Design, and it's about the 1955 painted ceiling panels of the Kuching Supreme Court. And Louise McCall is going to be giving that talk, and that will be on Friday, March the 31st. But now let's go back to the presentation we've just heard from Monica. First of all, I'll ask people who are in the room with us if anyone's got any questions for Monica. Yes, Ipoy.
I'm Ipoy from Lun Bawang community, just like my friend. Just a comment. From among the Lun Bawang community, we do have a term for dragon, which is known as Termaka or Termaka, which means dragon. And instead, it said that, like you said, maybe they don't really look at it in very friendly manner, but it can be also friendly if we manage to get all of the stores. This is the Bertia. They call it Bertia. If you can get all of the stores, it can give you good power and good luck. Transformation, they do believe that it transformed from a big snake called Mandalan, which is a big python, Mandalan. And before it can transform into the dragon, it has to go through a series of physical tests, or strength of physical tests, test of physical strength. How it does this, then it will, it is said to stay in the mountain originally, and then it will go down when there's the river is big. It will stretch itself from one bank of the river across the rapid. The water is flowing, it will stretch itself. If it is strong enough, it will not be washed away. If it was away, it will return to the hideout and wait for it to grow bigger and stronger. Until some time it can withstand the water, then it can then transform into the dragon, then may move away and become a dragon. So this is the Limbawang story about how the big snake will eventually transform into the dragon. It has to undergo a sort of physical strength. And then there are water spirits known as the Lalao. It's known to be long and serpentine, and if you happen to see it in the red, it's what a slimy sort of appearance. And that's why people used to say, if you see it or what, people got drowned in the river because it had encountered with this Lalao. Yes, the water spirit. Besides the crocodile being used as the effigy, the crocodile organ effigy, they also use what's known as the darum. The darum is something like a big serpentine. It can be in the coil form or in the cylindrical fashion. And they also construct it as effigy for mark or for headhunting prowess apart from the normal crocodile. This is the darum in the Lundayan terminology. So that is like you said, because I have to go, I have something on in MICE at the moment, so I may have to make my exit. Thank you.
Ipoy, you have a copy of the article that I wrote on Highland Dragons. You do? Yeah. That's that is what I found. You said a few little bits pieces that I've not, I wasn't aware of that, so we'll have a chat about. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ifoy. Any other questions from the floor? Okay, got a contribution here from.
I have a very short comment here. First of all, thank you for your sharing and quite interesting findings from the various communities. And I do share the points that you have mentioned regarding how different communities look on the dragon. I think that is quite common among the ethnic communities in Sarawak. But I just like to say why we call it as a dragon and not as a serpent, you know, because it goes back to my understanding of the serpent as related in the Bible, in Genesis, for instance, you know. I mean, serpent and a dragon, I believe, more or less the same, it is the same meaning. And do you look into the meaning of the dragon as it relates to the serpent in the creation?
I have not looked into it in relation to the Bible. Of course, you're right. The serpent is mentioned in a story of Genesis. And I think for people who are Christian, this is going to interact with their existing beliefs. If they become Christian and they already have a belief in something that we're calling dragons. But in terms of using the word dragon, I suppose really I'm talking about beliefs that have something in common within Sarawak. I'm using the term dragon because it is quite widely used in English in Sarawak to refer to these entities. They're not straightforward serpents, they are transformations of serpents. And quite often they do have arms and legs or wings. Certainly the Chinese dragon has got arms and legs, and some Chinese dragons have got wings. So they are, and they're more spirit rather than animal. So the term dragon seems a reasonable one to use to refer to this entity that was a serpent, but has transformed into something that is not now a serpent and is more spirit-like and has characteristics physical. If you see it as an animal, it's not really an animal, but the way it's represented, that the serpent does not have. And then there's the head is very different to a serpent because serpents don't have horns, and the deer horns are particularly interesting. This is quite commonly referred to. So I feel it's a reasonable term. I'm not sure about using it worldwide because I don't know if one can really, say they're all the same throughout the world. But the association with water is a fundamental part of this being, and that you do find throughout the world, that there are these spirit beings associated with water. And so anyway. Does anyone else have any other questions? Do we have any questions on the chat? Let's just. Oh, okay. So Alexander Smith has got an interesting comment here. Are you with us, Alexander? Would we hear him?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, great. So your question is, sorry, can we read it? A very interesting talk. Robert Blust has written on the connection between dragons and rainbows, the origin of dragons in anthropos. Okay. He also draws connection between the dragon, the rainbow, and certain taboos against pointing at rainbows. So he's given you another contribution. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Alexander. Have you got any other questions there?
No, I'm just, it's interesting. I mean, Robert Blust did a lot of field work in Borneo, and he noticed a lot of the same things that you're pointing out. And his idea was that the reason that the dragon was associated with water is because rainbows exist at the boundary between sunlight and rain and water, and that their association with rivers comes from the fact that like waterfalls and mist creates rainbows at rivers and river areas, and that this association of rainbows and water led to a mythical belief in dragons, which is interesting, and it goes along well with some of the stuff that you were talking about. And he just, yeah, it's really cool and very interesting. So
Yes, yeah, thank you very much. And I'm aware of Robert Blust's article, and I do feel that it's a very good thesis. Of course, there is an association with the sea as well, and so it's a bit more complex, especially when you've got Chinese and Malay dragons are associated more with the sea. So you have to try to work out the relationship with the entire water cycle. But I think the rainbow thesis is a very good one. Thank you very much.
There are two more questions. There's a comment here about from the Bisaya community. The dragon has always been related to healing rituals, good and helpful creature, but only to those of higher status could be associated with this creature.
Yeah. Is that Gombang?
Yeah.
Can
Yeah. Thank you
hello,
very much.
Gombang.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me because I'm not using microphone.
Yes, I can hear you.
Anyway, in the Bisaya community, dragon used to be related to healing ceremony in the traditional Bisaya community. But right now, because of Christianity and all that, so the relationship between the dragon and the healing ritual among the Bisaya is slowly disappearing. But another thing is, dragon has always been related to as a good creature. In the olden days, people used to talk about dragon as very helpful. Actually, the dragon was the creature who really protect the Bisaya community from bad omens and from bad things. Another thing is, when we perform ritual on this, it has to be among the people of higher status. It's not among the commoners. The commoners, ordinary people, they use the crocodile as their ritual creature. But for those on the higher rank, like the Pengulus, the head of the communities, they normally look at dragon as their ritual creatures. So this is all that I wish to share. But anyway, thank you, Dr. Monica, for all this. So at least it enlightened me of my Bisaya belief and my Bisaya ritual practice traditionally. Thank you very much.
Gombang, thank you very much, and I'd love to talk further if you are able to talk, because I have no data on the Bisaya as yet, and it would be very good to get some stories from the Bisaya community. So please do get in touch with me, and maybe we can.
I would like that very much, because I'm doing something with Dr. Pauline actually on the Bisaya traditions, and I think we can talk more about this later on.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
There's another quick comment from Azizul Ahmad, who says he's studying the dragon in Tasik Chini Pahang, and he's asking if it's related to Sarawak. Is it related to the Sarawak?
Yeah.
Is there a relationship between the Tasik Chini Pahang serpent and the Sarawak serpent?
Well, yeah, I'm sure there is. I mean, the Tasik China one is in a pool in Pahang, yes, and I have read about this, and it would be lovely to visit sometime and actually speak to people there. But it is people frequently say that in any deep pool there is going to be a dragon. In the river. The Kelabit used to tell me about there being Managag in deep pools, for example. Managag is the Kelabit word for it. So I think in that sense, it's very parallel. You know, where you have a deep pool, you expect that there will be one. I would say it's almost to saying that water, if it's a large body of water, it's as if the water itself generates sentience, a spirit. So I think it is very parallel, yes. And I look forward one day to going and talking to people at Tasik Tuna and Pahang. Yeah, thank you.
There's one other question here from Elena Morang. Are dragons mentioned in old songs?
Well, the Kayan Takna do mention dragons. Some young dragons, as well as the python dragons. So there are encounters with them in the water, and there are Singyang dragons carved on carvings. So I know of that, but I don't know of others as yet, but then it's probably because I haven't got all the songs and stories yet. But I would guess there will be found. I don't recollect it being in any of the Kelabit stories. Certainly in Tukadrini myth, there isn't a mention of it, or I believe in the other epics. But maybe down in the Baram, it's more common, because they do say that you see them more as you go down the Baram. I think the Kenya was saying the Kayan see them because they're further down the Baram and they get washed down there, so they don't stay higher up the river for so long. So perhaps that's why. But certainly in the Kayan epics.
Any more questions or comments from around? Yes, Nick.
Okay, I have a question. One of the things that we also notice to be in common among the various peoples of Borneo is that the python can be a popular item on the dinner table.
Yeah.
So have you encountered any beliefs regarding the eating of pythons or shootaroos?
That's a very interesting question, Nick. I haven't, but that's really worth thinking about. I think, though, that when it's still a python, it's just a python. It's only when it becomes very huge and turns into a dragon that it actually gains the characteristics of a dragon.
Yeah.
So I have not encountered any Kelabit having any problem with eating pythons.
Yeah, but like for the Iban, for example, like depending on the group, like some Iban groups would see certain animals like python or the deer to be like representations of their ancestors, or would be something that they would consider to be food taboo.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've not encountered anyone except Malays, interestingly, saying that their ancestors are dragons. But I think that's worth bearing in mind, because high status people who might say that their ancestors are dragons, they could have a food taboo about eating pythons. It's really worth looking out for. Thank you.
Okay, there's another question from Caroline. Caroline, are you there? I'll just read your question then. The Lahanan have a story about a python dragon. It's called Nyang. So do you know about this story about the Lahanan Nyang?
No, I don't, Caroline, and I'd love to hear about it. If you can hear me, I'd encourage you to get in touch. So please do. No, I don't know that story.
Okay, and Alexander's given a comment saying that Kenya in Longshan eat pythons.
Yeah.
Even so, they have dragon motifs in their church, and they eat pythons. So there's a nice coincidence, the difference between the animal and the spirit. Does anyone else have any more comments? Because if not, oh yes.
one of
Cat,
the
cat.
stories that you read earlier was that if a python has never been seen,
Use the mic.
so one of the comments that you read earlier was if a python has never been seen by a human, then it will become a dragon. So does that mean that they believe humans have got the power to stop that evolution of an animal?
I don't know, Kat. That is it's not a question you can ask directly. You have to try and work it out. Who knows? I think not. I suspect it's just that it is separate from humans, and not that humans can stop it, but that it's it needs to be pure, as it were,
Truly
in some
wild.
way, truly wild. Yeah. But then, you know, they can appear as humans once they become dragons. But then spirits can appear as humans, can't they? It's quite a lot of stories about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There, no more questions from up here. No more questions. Well, I think we give a big round of applause to Monica.